Welcome again, and thank you for joining Slave Food Conversations, where two African-American physicians, Dr. Columbus Batiste, cardiologist, and Dr. Eric Walsh, emergency room physician and doctorate of public health, explore the role of racism as a unique form of stress and the weaponization of food and the creation of health disparities in the African-American communities, irrespective of income. This episode welcomes the return of Dr. Ricardo Whyte, and a special new guest, attorney Judie Saunders. Dr. Ricardo Whyte is a well-respected and well-experienced psychiatrist. He is the founder of the Mastermind Institute, a program that offers a secret guide into learning how to master the mind and communication psychology. Judie Saunders is a fierce and dedicated attorney who founded the law firm of Judie Saunders. Saunders' career's focal point is to protect the constitutional rights of her clients, relentless fight for justice or against injustices, and defend those who suffer through emotional, sexual, physical, and psychological abuse. These two admirable pros devote their time to effect major change in their respective fields. This discussion will address mental health in order to break the silence and the stigma, bringing healing to the body and the mind. The Slave Food team once again thanks you for your support. Please continue to spread the word about the Slave Food Project and subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking the subscription button. Thank you. We'll turn it over to you now, Columbus.
All right. Thank you, Jeanette. Eric, good to see you. Welcome back, Dr. Whyte, and special welcome to Judie Saunders. How are you both doing?
Doing good.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. I'm so appreciative, Eric, as we start out, because Judie, man, she agreed to join us despite all of the travels and everything she has going on. So she's especially tuning in and joining us via phone. So I'm very appreciative of her efforts to join us today.
Thank you all. I appreciate you accommodating this. This is not how I expected it, but I was so excited and felt so honored to be with you and your distinguished guests that I am making this appearance while I am traveling. So my apologies, but I am excited to participate. Thank you.
The pleasure's all ours. Eric, how are you doing?
I am doing very well. Managing this latest surge, seeing all these patients. Been crazy, but God is good. We are thriving and surviving in the middle of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, tonight I think we want to discuss a different type of surge. We're talking a different type of surge that seems to be all amongst us, which is the surge of mental crises, is what we're seeing on a regular basis. And I think we've all are aware of the things that have transpired with Naomi Osaka, the things that have transpired with Simone Biles. And, as it really struck me, a father of kids and so forth, really the impact inside of this group and on athletes in general. And that's really the purpose of this discussion here tonight. And so I'm pleased once again, Ricardo, that you're here, and Judie with your expertise. So let's dive right in. Tell me your thoughts about the situation between this interplay between sports and athletes and mental health.
We could start with Simone. I was really touched by a number of areas of her story. But one of them is the following. When you commit yourself to being a pioneer in your field, you by definition push boundaries. And you push yourself to be at the best level of your craft. Where that journey took Simone is pioneering routines that are above and beyond what others even want to try. What was the reward? What was the reward of her pioneering those kinds of techniques? They were graded down, and there were different measures, I understand, that were taken in order to actually discourage that pioneering. What does that do to you as a person? How does that impact you? That in and of itself, it's like when you pioneer something, you're supposed to be rewarded for it. You're supposed to be incentivized. You're supposed to be incentivized to push the boundaries. Because even if you call it dangerous today, tomorrow, when people perfect it and they practice making it safe, that's the definition of sport. you know? And so these are some of the quiet experiences that that young lady has sustained. And I'm skipping over the sexual trauma, okay? I'm skipping over the trauma that she has experienced. So when you're talking about Simone, you're looking at a number of factors that have come together. Never mind the adaptations that had to take place because of the pandemic, you know? So this is really a special, you know, situation. And I'll close with this. I enjoy looking at an old tape in which Venus and Serena's father, Venus is being interviewed and her father's in the background. And it's looking like a fairly benign interview. She's a little girl she's pretty young at the time. And so the interviewer asked her, "Hey, so you think you're gonna win, huh?" And she goes, "Yes." Yeah, with big bright smile. And so the interviewer continues, "You sure are confident?" "Yes, I am." Big smile. What makes you so confident, you know? And he takes it down this little subtle angle. The father eventually gets up and he goes, "She already told you what this is. She already told you what this is. Stop bothering her." And I wonder to myself, how many of them have someone like that in their corner? And what is the impact on that mentally? And we don't want to minimize the role of the mental game, because we know that at that level where they're competing, it's all mental. So I'll leave it there at that. But it's very interesting, and I'm so happy that you guys are having this conversation.
Yeah, no, that's a great intro into this. And there's so many things I want to pick apart with that, not pick apart, but to touch on, I think are important for us to explore a bit more. But Judie, I know you're driving, and did you, so I'm not sure how much of that you caught, but
No,
we were talking.
I did.
Oh,
I was able to catch it. Can you, and I'll check in a couple of times to make sure that you can hear me. Is my audio okay?
It's wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. So from the perch that I sit in the universe that I live in and work with some of these athletes, what I found to be interesting is to pick up on the patterns. We know the old saying that, you know, the children will lead them. They have the voice. I think even in our generation, we try to, in so many ways, speak for ourselves. When you have, I guess, a convergence of adults who are bearing down, to me, Osako and Biles are continuing on a recentering of a movement, so to speak. And I'll loop it around by saying this. We meaning a collective culture, sports-driven culture, we have this thirst, this hunger for athletes at every age. If you look back on some of the footage of Olympics that took place in the 50s or 60s, the athletes were much older. They were in their 20s. Now you have young boys and girls who are being groomed, being commercialized, being monetized as early as 5, 6, and 7. And it's serious business. So, for example, in some of the lawsuits that I work on, you'll actually have individuals, you'll have young kids where you can actually say they have a loss of income because their lives have been basically monetized by the time they're 12, 13, and 14. They're on a track. They've been pulled out of a normal lifestyle. They've been pulled out of a school. They're in boarding school. You know, that's the reality. I'm putting out these little pieces to show what are the fissures that are leading up to the cracks that we're seeing and the mental health that I'm so glad that these girls are finally talking about. It's only, to me, a small piece when you see them finally speaking out. Some of the piece that I see, like I was saying, in the universe that I live in, is where it comes to, you know, they're actually finally speaking out and bringing lawsuits, bringing action for what's happened to them. So I am in particular happy that this is happening. I think that it's going to continue, and it has been for, you know, you have usually instances where it's sex abuse, but I've had individuals that have said, you know, yes, when an authority figure has violated me sexually, that has been horrible. But what is even worse is the psychological, the verbal, the emotional abuse that they remember. So this discussion is very relevant, and there's so many ways, there's so many different angles to look at this.
Yeah, no, that's good. Eric, you're gonna jump in. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think so, I want to tag on to something that Attorney Saunders just said, and that is, I think what is most frightening is the monetizing of these individuals. And to be monetized at such a young age, our society doesn't do well with it. There's a reason when you look at child stars on television, music, and here now sports, long term, a lot of them don't do well. Some of them do, but a lot of them don't do well. Because when at such a young age, you're responsible. You know, I was just, I forget who I was just listening to be interviewed, a child star. And they're talking about the responsibility they had because they knew that their family literally ate or didn't eat based on their success. You know, someone that I forget who it was, but someone that we all grew up watching. And there was, you know, this kid was like, you know, the weight that was placed on me to be successful was huge. And then you got to think about what happens when you get in front of cameras. I mean, Osaka, she was getting, you know, they're ridiculing her magazine cover pictures, and then some of the other Black gymnasts historically have been talked about because of their hair. And I mean, so once you get into that kind of limelight, and there's the expectation that you're going to generate all this money for corporations like Nike and others, there's an incredible amount of pressure put on you. And it's like high school, but on super steroids, right? I mean, so now you're in the limelight, but there are a lot of people coming after you. And I would, you know, to Dr. Whyte's point, I mean, even if you skip over the sexual abuse, which you can't skip over, obviously, I mean, I think it's critical to this whole thing. But even if you skip over it, the rest of it is really daunting that our society puts this kind of pressure on them. Because I think if they were left to just practice their sport in peace, they'd be fine. But the critics are unrelenting. The demand for them to do more and better so they can make more money. I want to throw in one other athlete, and that is the female sprinter that Nike wouldn't use because she was pregnant. What's her name?
Oh yeah, Allison
Felix.
Yes.
Yeah, I was blown away by that. And she came out with her own shoe line, so God bless her. But just the point is that the pressure that's put on to be perfect is really, really difficult. I think for anyone, never mind someone at the age that some of these young athletes are trying to do it.
Yeah. So question to you folks, because I absolutely agree with that. Is it even harder? I mean, obviously mental health, and Dr. Whyte, you can speak to this, but mental health is hard for anyone to admit to. It appears to be. It's becoming easier as there's more awareness being drawn to it by celebrities, by social media, but it still is hard. Is it even harder for our athletes? And take it another level, is it even harder for our athletes of African descent to admit to this, speaking to the impact of what Osaka and Biles have done?
So trauma and stress is especially problematic when it compounds. And when you look at the experience of these athletes of already having to deal with the stressors of their sport, but then on top of that, having to deal with what might be in some ways disrespect from, let's say, interviewers, then dealing with the expectations of the fans, then dealing with the expectations of family, because family have their expectation that they're crowding upon you as well, and then dealing with the expectations of the industries that you are connected to and that you're representing. Everyone has expectations. Everyone has expectations. Then you have your own personal expectations that have been primed up per se by what you've sacrificed, because you've sacrificed with the mindset that at some point this is going to pay off. Like, this is just a little snapshot of what it is that these people are dealing with. And then they, like everyone else, has this added level of complexity. When we're talking about mental health, we're talking about something that we struggle to have the language for. So take, for example, if the body and the brain constitute the bulb, right? The mind is when the light comes on. That's how subtle the mind is. Okay, that's the expertise that I've chosen, is to study the mind. You have neurosurgeons that are dealing with the brain. You have neurologists that are dealing with the brain. I deal with the mind. That language, it's very hard for it to be available to a lay person to understand the subtle needs of the mind. And if Naomi says, hey, I'm having chest pain, and she wants to leave the interview, no problem. You know, you fractured your ankle or something like that, no problem. But when you talk about, hey, my mind, the flicker of the light is a little problematic. You know, I'm struggling from a mental standpoint, that we have no respect for. And here's what really infuriates me. Are you calling into question these professionals' level of dedication? They have more dedication in their pinky than most of us will have in our entire lives. Are you saying this person struggles with sacrificing or with resilience? My understanding is Simone has performed with broken toes. You know, these are people that have performed with sprained ankles. These are tough people. These are very tough people. Could it be that the weight of the stress that's on them, you know, is just so surpassing? And so what I think we need to see is a balancing of, if you're going to put all this weight on them, balance it with adequate support. Balance it with the support. But at some point, I think that's the message these athletes are communicating, that, look, you can't just address, you know, physical trainers and this, that, the other thing, and there's so little for my mental health, for my mental wellness. That needs to stop being the afterthought. And I really start to put energy into, how do I protect a champion mindset? Those are my thoughts. That's the struggle in them articulating their needs, is that language is very subtle and it's not often very available.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in real quick. I you know, what you said, it struck like a chord of something I was reading and looking into with a collegiate athlete, and they described their day, from school, from testing, from practice, the need to perform, to the lack of sleep, to travel, and all of, as you characterize, the lack of resources, the lack of things to support them, the lack of being able to establish this relationship, and in all honesty, the inability to really express their frustration, and how it just built layer upon layer upon layer until they really had a break in terms of a major depressive event. And so, you know, to Attorney Saunders, I mean, I think the question is, where are the legal ramifications? What are the things that are present to support our child athletes, right? And I'm saying child, I mean, before the age of 21, our kids, our youth, our tomorrow, that can help protect them from this?
So unfortunately, what's going on in the courts when we're talking about mental health and recognizing injury, and can you guys hear me okay? I'm just going to check in again.
Loud and clear.
Okay. So when you're looking at the courts and you're looking at the court recognizing mental injuries, so psychological injuries, it is still woefully behind. We are yet to catch up with medicine in recognizing these injuries that happen, not the physical injuries, but the psychological injuries. So I have brought cases and filed actions that are going forward, not on sexual, but based on psychological injury, verbal, and it is tough. It is still tough. It's very hard to persuade. It's very hard to get, you know, the case law to support the physical injury. Courts want to, psychological injury. Courts still want to see that there's some physical injury attenuated. So yes, you know, did the coach, you know, push, punch? There was a case of in the Midwest with a gymnastic coach, John Geddard. He was renowned for the physical violence that his athletes endured, being pushed, hit, slapped. He was finally indicted and then was allowed to turn himself in, killed himself on the way to turning himself in. But those are the type of cases that the court will act on when you have some type of physical abuse or sexual abuse. It's most attorneys will turn away a case of an athlete saying for years I've endured verbal, psychological abuse. It's still behind with that, unfortunately. And that's one of the things that I'm seeing and continue to see in my practice, that we talk about mental health. We want to recognize it. There are so many people in the movement that want it, but it's not there yet. It's hard to win a case. It is still that saying, toughen up, snowflake, get over it. That's still the way we're treating our athletes. It's very hard. I'll get calls, 2-3 times a week. A parent saying they were either banned or were not allowed to come into the gym. That's very common when you get to an elite level. Parents are not allowed in. The parents are not witnessing. So you're only getting secondhand, or you're seeing your child come to the car crying. And a lot of the times you'll have, and it goes without saying, I'm not speaking to the thousands of great encouraging coaches. I'm talking about the ones that are abusive, and it doesn't even have to be a coach. It could be a trainer. Unfortunately, I know some physicians that are, act in concert with that, will clear and return athletes back prematurely back to play. And all of that plays on the athlete. And I think that what it really goes to, guys, if I were to boil it down to 2 words or kind of 2 concepts, it's our culture being out of alignment, parents being out of alignment, and then we produce athletes and kids that are out of alignment with themselves. They lose authority to speak for themselves. And so what I think that we saw exemplified in these 2 young ladies is they were taking back some of that authority, and you immediately saw push.
You went silent.
Back. You saw individuals that.
Yeah.
The Matrix.
Yeah, Judy, your reception kind of went out a little bit, but just speak
Okay,
up when
all right.
Oh, no, you're back now.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
We can, and that was powerful in terms of them taking control. That's a wonderful example for them to take control and to own it and to bring this to the forefront like that again. So that's what you're speaking about. So continue. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was saying. The 2 concepts that I would boil it down to is that we are out of alignment, and these athletes are showing that they're taking back authority of their own bodies, of their mental and physical health.
After you, Eric. When I'm a biochemistry major, and I remember we used to work in labs. One of the courses we took was quantitative analysis, and the game of quantitative analysis was identifying a given compound. One of the tools we would use for identifying the compound was the melting point. The melting point. Everyone has a melting point. Having a melting point doesn't make you inhuman. It actually validates your humanity. Mm-hmm. And I think it's unfortunate when we try to make it as if having a melting point is in some way, this person being less than. No, it's important to acknowledge that if you're human, you have a melting point. And where there are these super, super high expectations, you've got to balance it with support. You've got to balance it with support. We understand they need nutrition, and I'm sure that's provided. We respect the physical requirements, for these performances. And it's time we start paying attention to, hey, what does mental support, look like? So that melting point issue, like where we try to demonize a person for having one, when in fact it validates their humanity.
Yeah, and I want to jump in because I think one of the greatest athletes of all time is Michael Jordan, clearly. And even Jordan's had a melting point. I think when, after his father died and, basketball just, it just didn't seem to, I don't know what happened, I can't get in his head, but he stopped playing basketball and, and went and played baseball for those few years. it had everything to do with a lot of what we're talking about. You know, he was being criticized a lot. He was being scrutinized a lot, and he stepped away because of that. And one of my cousins who played professional football, Sean Taylor, who played for the Washington Redskins, was a safety, number 5 overall in the draft. And I remember one off season him telling me how much pressure it was, how much he disliked the NFL, how there was no one he could trust. Sean was in his early 20s at the time. You know, how there's so few people that you can trust. And he went on about that. And I was like, man, you know, you think with the money that these guys make, you know, they have it all together, you know, it's a dream come true, but there's a lot more to it. Because one, you can't let up on the physical training and all of that. But then the other side of it is there's a whole lot of stress. And one of the things we talk a lot about in Slave Food is about stress. And I think when you look at this issue, it speaks to the fact that although we're talking about elite athletes right now, this trickles down to many of the young people in our communities, many of whom sports is the escape. It's the hatch to get you out of whatever situation it is that you're in. For some of us, it was academic, and it's just as relevant, and the pressure's put on some of us to perform academically. But this is another stressor, the stressor of performance, and I think the stressor of scrutiny, to being looked upon really hard, and then added to that the abuse, the neglect that happens to so many along the way. So when we talk a lot about stress on Slave Food, and this is another way that stress can actually be introduced into someone's life, even when they're very successful, which is why when we look at a lot of our longevity numbers in Slave Food, we find that even successful African-Americans still live shorter lives when compared to people successful from other populations. We still live shorter lives. And it's because a lot of what we're talking about here, it was interesting. I just watched the documentary, the Mayhem in the Mayhem, what was it? Something in the Mayhem in the Palace or whatever it was when the Pistons and the Indiana Pacers fought. Beautifully done documentary. Showed you the other side of the story, and did an amazing job of doing that. Malice in the Palace, that was the name of it. And one of the things that was mind blowing is when one of the Pistons Pacer players, and I don't remember which Pacer player it was that said it. He said they've been fighting in hockey for decades.
Jermaine O'Neal,
them thugs.
Yeah,
and it blew. I was like, he's right. Like they sanction fighting, and nobody's a thug in hockey. And that's the kind of scrutiny and pressure that you put on that actually causes disease.
Yeah. Just to add to that, just for a moment, one of the things that when I was kind of doing a lot of reading surrounding what was going on with them is you look at the history, whether it was Jack Johnson, if it was Muhammad Ali, in the African-American community, we hold up our athletes on a high pedestal. And we're looking for them as a reflection that, yes, we can overcome. Yes, we can succeed. Yes, we can do it. And so I wonder if there's another layer of responsibility or in other words, stress placed on these athletes in addition because of their ethnicity, right? And because of the fact that they're of African descent. And so now you have this added along with the introduction of social media, along with the introduction of nationalism in terms of Simone Biles from the United States and looking at the Olympics and so forth, along with this biracial effect for Naomi Osaka and being split between two different worlds and the expectations that are there from each of them. And so I think it's multi-layered for many athletes, but looking at those specific situations for them, just curious, as Eric, you mentioned, we know that stress equates to disease in many instances when it becomes distress, the way that these folks are experiencing.
Yeah, you just nailed it. You both just nailed it. First, with regard to stress, a lot of times when we hear stress, we hear distress. Prior to the point where you have performance driving pressure, that's all eustress. So there's an element where there's pressure to perform, and when you're adequately resourced, that's all eustress. That's good stress. So for us, you take a skill set like cooking. If you ask me to cook something for you, I love you, and I'm good at it, and I have time. Hey, this is wonderful. Let me do it. That's eustress. But if I don't have time, maybe I don't like you, and I for some reason I don't have those resources, now we're over into the distress part. That's an important distinction to make, because it communicates to the sports community that you can push this back into eustress by adequately providing the resources. You see the need, now address it. That's with regard to stress. But I also wanted to talk about this trauma issue. It's one thing to sustain trauma. It's another to sustain trauma and be told, shut up. It's one thing to sustain trauma. It's another to have to experience the trauma in silence, in isolation, in quiet. And I think for a lot of those African-American athletes, there are things they have to sustain and be nonverbal. Nonverbal. I would not be surprised if their handlers communicate to them that it's only going to hurt you to complain. It's only going to hurt you to complain. And so it's bad enough sustaining the injury, but then also being told, shut up and dribble.
Well, let me tell you something. I know when you look at the life of Jackie Robinson, who, quote unquote, broke the color barrier in Major League Baseball, that's literally what he was told. I mean, he had to go not in the dugout. He had to go into the tunnel where no one could see him to scream and shout after he was called the N-word repeatedly on the field and monkey and things were thrown at him. He had to. That's why he was chosen. That's why the owner of the Dodgers, the Brooklyn Dodgers, chose him, because he felt he could take it. And I think that is a big part of the challenge. And I think it goes back to this monetizing, right? You know, I wouldn't be surprised if Simone Biles loses money because of what just happened. And I, honestly, I would argue maybe even some of the other athletes. I mean, you saw what, like I said, what happened to the young lady who was pregnant and Nike dropped her. So, you know, there's this idea that you have to be flawlessly perfect. And that is difficult. That's very difficult.
Yeah, you know, the other point I was going to make was about Michael, Eric, Dr. Welch. You talked about the mindset of Michael Jordan. And in watching The Last Dance, I got an insight into Michael that I'd never before recognized. Like, Michael's a phenomenal physical specimen, and I knew he had a killer mindset. But one subtle thing I picked up was Michael is a wizard. He is an absolute wizard at engineering a reason to win. He is a wizard at crafting a narrative as to why he must win. The example is, I believe it was the Pacers that they were playing. It was the Pacers that they were playing, and we're down to, I believe it's game 7. I'm no sports expert, right? But like, they're exhausted. The Bulls are exhausted and they're winded and they're just tired. It's a long series and the Pacers really want to win this one. When Michael lost his dad, rest in peace, you know, and sincerest condolences, Michael. When he lost his dad, one of the things you learn is there are mentors who surrounded him. One in particular was, I believe his name was it Joe? I believe his name was Joe. I can't say for sure, right? It was an older gentleman that sort of supported him during that period, always close to him, always providing support. Sadly, he came down with cancer. He's a cop. He shows up at that game 7 game. Okay. Why does Michael win? And guess who gets the winning ball? None other than Joe. And this was part of Michael's, you know, skill in crafting this story as to why he's got to win this thing. But then Michael out himself. He's like, I'm leaving the game because I no longer have a reason to win. I no longer have anything else to prove. I've got to go now. I've got to go now. And so he literally tells you how his thinking and what you see with these champions is they learn how to eat negative criticism for food. You heard LeBron say it recently. He's like I need any more fuel. Like when I guess he wasn't chosen as number one, he's like I need any more fuel, but I'll take that too. Or you hear Floyd Mayweather say, a cheer or a boo is a good thing. Either one, as long as it's a paying fan. That's all they really care about. So they give you some insights into their mindset and how they learn how to take adversity and actually utilize it to up their game.
You know, that's deep. I mean, I love both those. We all love sports and love hearing about champions. I'll tell you the one thing that kind of broke my heart when I read this quote, and I want to get Judie, if you're on, your feedback to this too as well, and then yours, Ricardo, and then yours, Eric, as well. Simone Biles, she said, it hurts my heart that doing what I love has been taken away from me to please other people. You know, and she was describing the high stress of competing. And so it makes me think about, yes, at that level of our epitome of athletes, that they achieve this level and find that fuel to get them going. But what about our kids who are, you know, 9-year-olds and they're 12-year-olds and they're 15-year-olds, and it's part of it is the love of the game and desire to do what they love and the enjoyment that comes from it. But now that pleasure is being taken away. And how, I guess the question is, what's been your experience, Judie, with that? And how do we protect those individuals, Ricardo? Judie, you first. And if you're not, so Judie's not on, so Ricardo, why don't you go ahead and take it?
Absolutely. What does Michael Jordan, even Mike Tyson, Serena Williams, Venus Williams, Miss Osaka, Naomi Osaka, who else? Tiger Woods. What do they all have in common? Do you know? A committed father figure. And I only add figure with Mike Tyson because it was Customato who was his father figure. For the others, it's literally their father. And I say that as an encouragement to men, like especially with Naomi Osaka's dad, especially with Serena Williams and Venus Williams. They came home and crafted a future. They were like, I'm inspired. I see this. And especially with the case of Richard Williams, he's like, they're going to be number 1 and number 2. You want to fall out of your chair when you think about this, like what this guy crafts out from Central, you know, from.
I think you almost can add in LeVar Ball.
You can, and you can add LeVar Ball, but it's as a side note. This is to emphasize the role you can have as a man in contributing to your kids. Like, that's profound that they all have that in common. Floyd Mayweather. Like over and over, and you see it. So like it's kind of earth-shattering, like, oh my goodness. Like, I'm sorry, but you have something there. We're not talking about number 2 in the field, number 3, even Wayne Gretzky. Wayne Gretzky, again, he'll talk about the contribution of his dad. I'm not minimizing the contribution of mom, by the way, because you'll also see in a number of those, it's a 2-parent family. You'll see it in a number of them, not all of them, but in a number of them. But look at this profound impact. I say all that to say that there's clearly some kind of support, some kind of structure that is creating this kind of amazing results. And obviously you see them starting from super, super young. Now, what that allows me to do is to now pull back and say, guys, we have something special here. And it's fantastic that, you know, you've crafted this vision and you're there to support your kids. But now there's one more piece you really want to pay attention to, and that is the mindset of your kids. The mindset. How do you help them have a balanced and healthy mindset? What do you now need to do to make sure that's supported? Because one of the things that needs to be protected is their childhood. Is their childhood. One of the things Wayne Gretzky champions is his dad's protection of his childhood. his dad's protection of his childhood, his dad's protection of him being able to be creative and not just being in the structured play, but Wayne having the time to self-develop and self-actualize and spend time doing what he wanted to do, you know? So I would say the folk that are around these kids, no longer can you just be hyper focused on the outcomes, because it's easy to be distracted by the win and not see the hidden losses that show up later. Excellence, like here's what's interesting. I think those amazing performances validate what we're capable of as humans. That's why we're intoxicated by them, because it validates us. It reminds us we can be better. Okay. Mm-hmm. But now we need to balance it by saying, you know what, but I still need to protect the child, because they're going to need that as well.
Absolutely. A lot of interesting comments in the chat section today. And so definitely see that it is welcomed, this discussion that is a little bit of a veer from our standard slave food kind of talk. But one of the questions is for you, Dr. Walsh, what does the Bible say about stress?
So I've had a lot of patients in the work that I do in urgent care. I see a lot of people, and I'm like, first line of defense against psychiatric disease. Before someone can see Dr. Whyte, a lot of times I'm the one who has to put in that referral. And I have to deal with people straight off the street, dealing with often, not major psychotic episodes. They're not winding up in an ambulance 5150 to a hospital. Mm-hmm. They're not dealing with life. Literally what we're describing about these athletes, single mothers are having, because they're trying to juggle school and work and parenting. Or I have young people, many young people now, who come in 18, 17, 21 years old, trying to get through college, having financial issues because they're romantically involved, often sexually involved. They're dealing with deep emotional issues around these relationships and have a hard time balancing all of that, managing all of that, heartbreak that comes from relationships or not doing well in school. And a lot of times I'm that first line of defense. And as a Christian physician, one of the Bible texts that I have used repeatedly over the years when I'm talking to someone in those situations is 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 7. It says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." All the way back to what Dr. Whyte said earlier when he was talking about the bulb, a great analogy, and when the light comes on, that's the mind. It's an equation. 2 Timothy 1:7 is an equation. You will have fear. You'll have difficulty in life if you cannot keep a sound mind balanced. God gives it to us as a promise. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but a power and a love and a sound mind. But if we do things to disrupt our mind's soundness, fear will come in. Mm-hmm. It goes both ways. And so this is why it bothers me when I see the monetizing and commercializing of some of these lives, because you disrupt that balance. The mind it's difficult for the mind to be sound because you have to start questioning yourself. And then the cracks happen and the fear comes in, just like for that single mother who now is questioning, can I be a good mother? Can I be a good provider? Can I be a good student? All of these things run through that person's mind. So biblically, the Bible says, listen, if you can keep it in balance, if you can keep me first as God, if you leave problems at my feet, Jesus makes it clear, right? Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Spiritually, the answer is to leave these things at the foot of the cross, to leave them with God and not carry them for yourself. But that's not always difficult because we're trained to carry it for ourselves.
Right. So it sounds like
really a big part of it.
So it sounds like what you were saying is that some of your patients are coming in with physical, basically their physical result as a result of their mind kind of having a crack. So there's shortness of breath, they're having a hard time breathing, or their stress or their heart, but it really boils down to the stress that they're trying to manage in their lives and how they're going about managing the stressors of day-to-day living.
They somaticize is the word. And I saw a patient just yesterday for the first time, Ricardo. I should have called you. She had a seizure induced by her anxiety after I was treating her for an anaphylactic reaction she was eating pepperoni and salami. She's allergic to some meat stuff. So of course, you might never want to eat meat again.
That was too easy, right?
But she had an anaphylactic reaction, and the stress of being treated with epinephrine and Benadryl IM, she had a seizure that she's had a history of due to when she gets super anxious. That's how powerful the mind is.
Mind is, right.
That's a statement of the part of I rubbed her feet while the nurses rubbed her arms, and we spoke to her, and she came right down.
Okay.
Power of the mind.
I'm gonna jump in real quick. Is you bring me back to a patient of mine I've had for a long time who suffers with lupus. And I've seen her at her lowest in terms of the impact on her body, where her heart function essentially dissipated nearly completely. Heart went irregular as well. And she'd stabilized. She was in a good place mentally. She was in church. She was in counseling. She was doing all those things that were there, got married, has a kid. And then all of a sudden, everything hits the fan as it relates to COVID. Her relationship just dissipates while at the same time having a young child. And what happens? She has a massive flare up once again. And so this mind-body connection is so important. It's so important that's there, as Dr. Walsh mentioned, in terms of taking care of your mind. And, I'll give you shortly at the end in closing in terms of like some of the physical things and tying things back into our message that we give as it relates to the transcription and what we espouse for folks. But it is important. I just wanted to acknowledge that again.
Can I hop in there? Or
absolutely.
With your permission, Queen.
Of course.
And as soon as I start saying the verse, Eric is gonna be all over it. My favorite for that, and Eric, you'll be able to tell me where it's found, because I think it's like in Romans. Be not conformed to this world. Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind.
Right.
Like that's like a prescription.
Mm-hmm.
That's like a prescription. Be not conformed to this world. So this world, this world is very money driven. Eric has been hammering this. This world is very money driven, and it will have you sell everything valuable to yourself in pursuit of the money.
Including your soul, right?
It tempts you to conform.
Mm-hmm.
And here you have the verse warning you, be ye not conformed to this world.
Mm-hmm.
But be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. How do you need to eat to renew your mind? How do you need to think to renew your mind? What boundaries do you need to set around your life so that your mind can continuously be renewed? It's a prescription. Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind.
Well, I think that's a great segue.
Romans 12:2.
Okay.
And it is a critical scripture. I tell people, this is one of the things I tell patients when I know that they're willing to hear, spiritual truth. I tell them to get index cards and in their cubicle, put up Bible promises and change them out every week. Put up 3 or 4 every week. You'll be changed if you have Bible promises in front of you all the time. And this is one of the great ones. Our minds have to constantly be renewed, because what are we always getting? You know how many patients I have now that tell me, I do not watch the news, doc. I cannot watch the news. I stopped watching the news 13 months ago. I can't handle the news. I don't even want to know. I don't want to know about Delta, Lambda, Gamma. I don't care. I don't want to hear about it at all. Don't tell me about Afghanistan, doc. I don't want to hear. I'm too afraid. Your mind has to be renewed. And this is why we're given the Sabbath, as an opportunity to renew our minds.
This COVID thing is like a revenge of the nerds. Lambda, Delta, my goodness, man.
Okay, we have a question about, and I don't know if Judie can hear us and able to respond.
I can hear you.
Okay, how can parents or adults teach children about what constitutes inappropriate touches from young people in sports?
Absolutely. I think the best way to teach is to model. The one thing that has to be modeled most of all, and is what is extremely hard for parents, and I speak as a parent who struggles with it, is to let your children have a voice early and often in the small things, the things that maybe not as consequential. So they don't want to eat a certain food. Maybe they don't want to eat breakfast one morning. Give them that authority. Let them practice hearing their voice, standing up for themselves. Am I still coming in okay, guys?
Absolutely. You're good.
Okay. That's the best way. By the time parents and children, and I handle cases that are the spectrum from children to young adults to adults, but by the time someone gets into my office, usually their voice has been silenced. And it doesn't just start necessarily with the one perpetrator or the abuser. It usually, and staying away from victim blaming, but if we really want to do a systemic change, I look and I see that a lot of times maybe the child's voice was silenced at home. Maybe it's a very strict environment. I was raised in a strict environment. Children are to be seen, not heard. But there's no other adage, there's no other sentiment that I've seen that's hurt individuals than that. Our courts are a way for individuals. We spoke a little while ago. I was listening in, not sure if my audio was working, but when you have trauma, but you're not allowed to speak it, part of the job of the courts is to rectify that, to give individuals back their voice. There's a whole concept in the law about an outcry witness, a disclosure witness. It's so profound, the ability that when your voice is taken away, that we actually name the person that you're actually talk to when you finally are processing the trauma. We call that your outcry witness. So that's the best way that I could say that parents teach. It's stop teaching and start modeling. Start, right. If your child decides that the person that Uncle Bill, they don't like them, they don't have to be rude, but they also don't have to be nice. Let children practice and sharpen their intuition and their inner voice. And that's how you protect. Nothing else protects you like the gift of fear, a healthy fear, not the anxiety and the panic that comes when you've been silenced, but it's that healthy intuition. Let your children lead. It goes without saying, I'm not saying, don't let them run into traffic. We know that, but let them lead, let them use their voice, and let them say no to you.
Right. And we talk about, in all of these discussions, we talked about the winners, right? So we're talking about these people who have achieved a lot. But what about those people who haven't achieved the same level? I mean, what are they going through, right? Like, we only want to listen to winners, but what are just the average person, who is, or the average student who's dealing with this stuff? If you're not winning, it's almost like you don't even matter. So it's very critical that people understand that they do have a voice, and that children do need to be heard and they need to be advocated for.
I think that there's there's hope coming out. Alston v. NCAA, which is a Supreme Court decision that came down recently that dealt with, among other things, Division I athletes being able to use their name, image, and likeness. But there was one brief, America's brief, a friend of the court brief that was written by African-American lawyers and attorneys. And they submitted that brief and they talked about just that. They said, yes, we celebrate and we talk about and we notice the athletes with the name, with the skill, but no one thinks about the athletes that get sucked into this machine, that are abused, that are hurt, and they lose scholarships. They end up, after 1 or 2 years, their bodies have been used. So circling back, how do we avoid that? How do you give your child that permission early on so that when they go off into, be it, their first year playing Division I or Division II, when they see the abuse, they say it's not worth it. It's not worth it in the long run. And that's practiced early on.
Right.
I wanted to jump in and say, and it's not either or. My mother, you were heard and not seen and not heard, but my mother also said to us, if someone puts their hand on you this way or that way, tell me, I will. I mean, she was pretty explicit as to what she would do if that happened when I was just a little boy. I mean, she emphasized that. So we had a voice. If somebody had ever touched us inappropriately and we went to my mother, we knew she would follow up on it. Not every child gets that to Judie's point. And that is a scary and dangerous thing. You've got to listen to your child. And and at the same time, your child has to, you obviously have to have your child under some form of discipline, but it doesn't have to be either or. You can still empower your child to speak up as you train your child up in the right way. And if you don't, really bad things happen. I also want to say comment on something. When I was at, I won't say what university, I've been to a few, but I was at one with a major basketball program at the time. Went to the big dance, and I was able to see it. And I remember one of the football players, I ran into him late one night after we were studying. We went to like IHOPs or something, and he came in, and one leg was full size, the other leg was as skinny as like just completely emaciated. Mm-hmm. African American young man from the South, and he came and sat with us. We were all college grads doing like graduate level studies at our table, and he sat with us, and I was like, man, what happened to you? He's like, man, I got picked to come here. I hurt my leg my first year, and they dropped my scholarship. Mm-hmm. Because I'm here trying to figure out how I'm gonna get through the next 3 years of school when I can no longer play football.
Right.
And I was so glad in that moment I stopped playing football when I did, because I saw, man, these people don't care about you.
Right.
They could care less about you. If you can't produce, they drop you. It's like a giant plantation. So I was very glad to see that the NCAA made those changes that they made.
Right. And I'm going to just go on record that was not Oakwood, because we don't have a football team there. But okay, go ahead.
Absolutely, we do not.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, I think on a lighter note, I think all of us on this call, we came from that generation of be seen and not heard. So now when it was time to raise our children, I think we revolted. I know I did. And I think I took it to the other extreme, especially when my daughter was very comfortable saying no, including to me. Or, in arguments, it's like to this other extreme where it's like they have no respect whatsoever for your age, for your education, for your experiences in life. They're right. It's like, man, we went to the other extreme. Can we come back just a little bit? But whatever the case, I rather that other side. I rather you have a voice to a fault. I rather you be seen and heard. Listen to young people, listen as well. But it's time to be seen. It's time to be heard, because I think that was hurtful in some ways.
Absolutely. Yeah. Listening is such an undervalued tool inside society. I want to kind of bring it up into the solution phase, and we definitely want to end on a note of what you all think in terms of solution, where we go from here on a macro level and a micro level. And I think to what I know best, which is the training for physicians. And we know that there was just this lack of regulations on work hours, and you stay up all night, and it was a badge of honor to be up 40 hours continuously without any sleep. And it was a crime to ask your colleagues for help and to work on patients and everything. But science tells us that that's not the right thing to do, that sleep is important. It tells us the fact that nutrition is important, and we see these things. And it's through education that slowly has infiltrated into the graduate medical education to put restrictions on time allowed for individuals in training. And so I wonder, bringing this back full circle over into organized sports at the Pee Wee level, all the way through, what has to happen? What has to happen is the first question. What, from a medical perspective, furthering things along a bit more, what has to happen for the psychological well-being, and when do folks need to tap into an attorney like Attorney Saunders? And so let's end on this positive note and let folks know, and we'll go around the horn.
After you, Judy. Judy?
Yeah, okay. So am I good, guys, as far as audio?
Yeah.
Yes. You're good.
Oh, we had you for a sec.
Am I back? I know.
Yeah, you're back now.
Okay, so solutions as I see it. One, you've got to continue, we collectively as a culture have got to continue in the reforms legally, such as extensions, supporting lawmakers and legislation that are extending statute of limitations for survivors of abuse to bring causes of action. The more voices that we have, the more that we normalize what happens behind closed doors, abuses in gyms, abuses in locker rooms, the more we know about that. And that's through the way of being able to bring causes of action in court. So continue to support. So for example, in Pennsylvania, recently a bill died, legislation died, where the legislators would not support extending the time period for survivors of abuse to bring their causes of action. So we have to keep doing that. We have to keep talking about that. The second solution that I see is, again, goes back to what I preach all the time. There has to be a real alignment between what these athletes want. They have to know that it's okay to walk away, regardless of the investment that mom and dad have put in. Some of the athletes that I've worked with, the entire families are moving across the country to train with one particular coach. But what if that athlete now decides that they no longer, for whatever reason, they want to pursue maybe music or performing arts? They may not do that. They may feel the burden of their parents. Make sure that there's a check-in constantly over the journey of their athletic career to make sure everyone is aligned with that goal. That's the second solution. And then the third solution, I'll round it off with what I said before. We have to model, we have to allow. I will say, there is a balance, but allow that early, letting your children have authority. And Dr. Whyte, I can totally agree with you. I have a 14-year-old that I think I may have gone overboard with, because he has a lot of authority to tell me what to do. So I'm with you there. But until maybe we're aligned with the courts, with the medical evidence, and with individuals feeling that they don't have to stay silent, maybe there won't be a balance and we'll have to overcorrect, so to speak. Those are the solutions that I can offer.
That's great. So earlier today, I was talking to actually my daughter's, high school, and one of the things in the presentation that I talked about was bullying. What's the definition of the term bullying? A person who habitually seeks to harm or intimidate those whom they perceive as vulnerable. A person who habitually seeks to harm or intimidate those whom they perceive as vulnerable. But in my definition, I would add one more thing. A person who is allowed to habitually seek to harm or intimidate those whom they perceive as vulnerable. Bullying is allowed. When we observe bullying, when you're in a position of authority and bullying continues to exist, you become complicit. As we look at the unfairness that is being metered out against these athletes, those in power, you need to eradicate the bullying, or you're complicit. You're part of the problem. And as those athletes award us with breathtaking performances that we turn around and funnel into our lives and inspire us to be better surgeons and better psychiatrists and better attorneys and better mothers and better fathers. How many sermons have been written and analogies connected to sports are utilized? Because sports inspire us to be better, right? Well, we need to turn around and reward those athletes who are making those things possible. And how do we reward them? Exert the pressure that they get a more fair experience. Exert the pressure that we bump it back into it being something that's enjoyable, something that's eustress. Because in addition to the pressure to perform, we also add support. We also had meaningful support. We take a look at mental health initiatives that don't wait for pathology, doesn't wait for you to get sick. We provide support in terms of mental health. We define mental health. We support mental health. We teach, but we help an athlete and the industry understand, how do you nurture a champion mindset and one that is actually balanced and actually feeds the athlete in the short term, but also in the long term. We need to stop the bullying. And one of the things that underscores bullying is power differentials. When I was in honors ethics back in college, they talked about this issue of power differentials. Whenever you get this massive gap between a person in power and the vulnerable, when you investigate, you're often going to see some really egregious, crimes. And the way you get rid of that is you get rid of these massive power differentials. You move towards equality. And that's when you get rid of these massive abuses. So again, thank you for the opportunity to share.
Man, that's incredible. No, from both of you. And so we're very appreciative. Eric, do you have any last words here in terms of for hope for folks and what they should?
I think I want to bring it back to the regular man and woman again. As much as I love I'm with Ricardo. I mean, the analogies with sports are just incredible. The Apostle Paul uses one in 1 Corinthians 9:24-27, where he says, "Know ye not that they which run in a race run all, but only one receives the prize. So run ye that ye may obtain." Right? I mean, and the mastery. And he says, they do it to obtain a corruptible crown, but we an incorruptible. So all of these athletes get gold medals and stuff, but one day all of that is going to fade away. What matters, I think, is, and the lesson to be learned from it is the determination. As Dr. Whyte said, in the pinky of some of these people is more determination than some folk will show in a lifetime. But I want to, having the single mother I had and what I saw my mother accomplish was just as amazing as many of what these people did, except it took many more decades of chronicity in being dedicated than the quick, Michael Phelps went hard until he was, however old he was when he retired, and he can chill for the rest of his life. My mother could never stop. She could never let up. She had to continuously do this her entire life so that her children not only had a model of success, had food to eat, could go to college, on and on and on and on. But that comes with a price. And I think that's really what we're talking about here. These stressors come with a price. My mother died early of a stress-related cancer called multiple myeloma. And, there's a lot of things that may have gone into play with that. But I say that to say, even as we watch Simone Biles and even as I've watched other athletes say, listen, this is too much for me, psychologically, mentally, emotionally, whatever it is, we also have to go back to Dr. Whyte's point, know our melting point. We have to know when to go for help. And since we've been kind of dabbling in the scripture a bit more than normal tonight, even the prophet Elijah, if you study in our Sabbath school lesson this week, even the prophet Elijah, after he called fire from heaven, ran from Queen Jezebel and asked God to take his life. In I think that's 1 Kings 18:4. Asked God, he said, take my life, it is enough. Even he melted down. And he was carried off to heaven in chariots of fire. We each have to know when it's time to stop. And what did he get? Rest. He was fed by God. And God whispered. He spoke to him in a still small voice rather than in earthquakes or hurricanes or big fires. Stop sometimes. Every one of us has to stop and be recharged. Yes. As we say all the time on Slave Food, stress equals demands minus resources. Stop and charge your resources. Stop and reduce your demands so that you have an opportunity to do well. Because it's not just athletes that have to super perform. Many of us are being called on to super perform. Many of us in healthcare right now, standing in the gap between pandemic and death for many of our patients, are being asked to super perform. You've got to stop and recharge your battery.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You took the words out of my mouth, so to speak, but you always say it much more eloquently than I ever could as it relates to the role of building this resiliency. But I want to kind of turn out, I appreciate Dr. Whyte and Attorney Saunders for joining us, and appreciate pushing through the challenges and difficulties of technology here today, because this is an important conversation to have. Many of our youth are participating in sports, and just because they're not in the Olympics doesn't mean that this can't happen to them. So empowering them, in the words that Attorney Saunders mentioned, in terms of empowering your kids from a youth, and recognizing when to seek individuals like herself, and from Dr. Whyte too as well. And I want to turn to what I know, which is medicine. And I think that we have a responsibility as healthcare providers. And what's that responsibility is, I think we have to push the envelope in terms of destigmatizing mental health. We have to destigmatize mental health and stress for people, and to recognize this as a true injury, right? That's one of the key things. And I think in a very similar fashion to how the medical education has had to transform. We have to transform and educate the coaches, the trainers, the support staff to recognize the signs of stress, the signs of burnout. Eric, you mentioned in terms of the physician burnout. The physician burnout and suicide rates at an all-time high. And we're seeing this, and studies have shown, whether or not independent surveys and so forth, that the rate of depression and mental health in our athletes is high. It's growing. It's growing. And so this becomes extremely important. So I thank you both for participating in this special, unique conversations with the doctors. It's one unlike any that we've had in the past, but it's extremely timely and extremely important. And so we thank you for your expertise, for your skill level too as well. And we thank those who've tuned in. Please share this. There's someone out there who needs this message right now. So we ask that you share it. Go and like Slave Food Project on YouTube, like us on Facebook, share this conversation with others out there so they can get the benefit that you've listened into today. And we look forward to seeing you next week, as we actually will discuss the skin with a dermatologist and discuss ailments and how our food, as well as protection and a lot of different things, can play a role in our life. But appreciate you guys. Thank you again. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, bye.